Okay, so we're going to talk about subservice organizations. So a subservice organization, in the context of SOC reporting, is this third-party entity that is used by a service organization to perform some of the services provided to customers, especially those services that are likely to be relevant to the customer's internal control over financial reporting. So here within our mental map, we're going to talk about what is a subservice organization. We're going to talk about what is the criteria for a subservice organization. Then we're going to talk about the difference between the inclusive method and the carve-out method. All right, so that has to do with how we deal with the vendor's controls in the SOC report. All right, so once we have determined that the criteria for a subservice organization has been met, then the service auditor must consider how to deal with the controls in the SOC report, right? Which method are we going to use? So a SOC engagement is this audit of a service organization's controls related to various trust service principles. So this report can either be a SOC 1 report, a SOC 2 report, or a SOC 3 report. So here we're mainly going to focus on SOC 1 and SOC 2 engagements. So here are some specific considerations to bear in mind when planning and performing a SOC engagement. So we need to understand the nature of the business. Right, the first step in planning a SOC engagement is understanding the service organization's business, including its processes, controls, systems, and operational environment. This is understanding how to identify risks and formulate audit objectives. Right, then we need to determine the type of report. So determining whether this is a SOC 1 or SOC 2 report is ultimately going to be what we need to do, right? A SOC 1 report is focused on controls of the service organization that may be relevant to an audit of an entity's financial statements, while a SOC 2 report deals with controls relevant to security, availability, processing, integrity, confidentiality, or privacy, right? Our trust services criteria. We need to know if this is a type 1 report or a type 2 report. Okay, so a type 1 report gives the auditor's opinion on the suitability of the design of controls as of a specific date, while a type 2 report also includes the operating effectiveness of those controls over this period of time. Right, so understanding the user's needs will help us determine which type of report is appropriate. Then we want to identify relevant controls. Okay, so the auditor must identify the specific controls that are relevant to the service organization's services. In a SOC 1 report, these would be controls that could affect the financial reporting of the user entities. For a SOC 2 report, these are controls over one or more of the trust service principles. So we want to evaluate control design and operating effectiveness. So once controls have been identified, the auditor must then evaluate whether the controls have been suitably designed to achieve their objectives. And that's for both type 1 and type 2 reports. And then if this is a type 2 report, we also need to determine whether they are operating effectively. All right, once we have now determined our type of report, and we have evaluated the design and operating effectiveness if this is a type 2 report, we're going to gather more evidence. Okay, so gathering and documenting evidence to support the service auditor's conclusion about the suitability of the control design and operating effectiveness is ultimately what we need to do. And then we have reporting, all right? So now it comes down to preparing this report, right? So what goes in this report? Well, this is going to be the suitability of the design of the controls and potentially the effectiveness of the controls as well. Okay, so the service auditor should also present the scope of the engagement. And if the auditor had any limitations at all, this should also be disclosed. And finally, the results should also be disclosed. All right, so now we need to determine and understand any regulatory requirements. So the service organization may be subject to various regulatory requirements. What are a few examples? Could be GDPR, could be HIPAA compliance, or it could be Sarbanes-Oxley. So ultimately, the service auditor should understand these requirements and ensure that the controls meet them. Okay, so they should also stay current with technology and risks. As technology evolves, so do risks and controls. So the auditor needs to stay updated on new developments in technology and risk and consider that these could impact the service organization when they are planning and performing this SOC engagement. And the last thing to consider is whether or not we should use a specialist. Okay, so the service auditor isn't going to be an expert in absolutely everything. So oftentimes what they'll do is bring in a specialist, right? If the client, the service organization, is using complex technologies or processes, then the service auditor may consider using a specialist to better understand and evaluate the controls. All right, so the planning phase of the SOC engagement and the SOC report is a very important first step. Understanding the client, understanding potential risks, determining the types of reports, gathering evidence, this is all going to be important when performing this work.